Most men you see today are incapable of sustaining their own existence if there is not something external to validate or entertain them. They are in a state of permanent intoxication, not from substances, but from a pathological dependence on other people's things. Silence for them is not a space of clarity, it is a symptom of abstinence. The moment the environment stops feeding them irrelevant data, their identity falls apart. You're not going to be one of them. Mastering your mind when there is nothing to distract you is not an exercise in relaxation. It is an exercise in authority. Silence is the natural state of a high-functioning mind. But you have been conditioned to see it as a void that must be filled. They have taught you that if you are not consuming something, you are not being anyone. That is the trap that keeps the masses in a state of perpetual reaction. When you eliminate the noise of the world, what remains is the base structure of your character. And for most, that structure is a ruin, a set of echoes of other people, of imposed desires and fears that only survive because they have never been held accountable in absolute stillness. Understand this. If you need a screen, a sound, or a conversation to not feel uncomfortable, your mind is a parasite. It depends on external nourishment to generate a sense of reality. The moment that flow is cut off, the parasite panics. That physical urge to do something, to look at your phone or look for company, is proof that you are not the owner of your own mental territory. You are a tenant in a property that others are managing for you. Real mastery begins at the exact point where the stimulation ends. That is where the man who builds himself is separated from the man who is built by circumstances. In an hour of absolute silence, you are not wasting time, you are reclaiming the command that has been taken from you. You are ceasing to be a passive recipient and becoming the origin of each of your movements. The void is not a gap that must be covered. It is the space where the orders that you will later execute in the world are dictated. If you can't dictate those commands in stillness, anything you do outside will simply be an automatic response to the impulses of others. Today's world is designed so that you are unable to sustain a single thought for more than a minute. A mind that can inhabit the void is a dangerous mind, because it is a mind that is no longer predictable or manageable. Observe others, their attention is a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. If you are not actively directing your inner gaze toward your own goal when there is nothing compelling you to do so, then someone else is the master of your will. Being alone in a room with no tools, no voices, and no escape is the most honest diagnosis of your state of power. If you experience a physical need to interrupt that state, what you feel is not boredom. It is the weakness of a will that has been atrophied. You have surrendered your ability to command to external factors. The man who dominates his mind in emptiness does not seek peace. Look for hierarchy. He seeks to establish who is in charge and who is the one who obeys within his own skull. In silence, thoughts are not simple ideas, they are assets that you must audit. That impulse that just crossed your mind is yours, or it is the residue of a conversation from yesterday or an expectation that was injected into you years ago. Without vacuum you cannot do this cleaning. You're too busy swallowing what the world throws at you to analyze the quality of what's inside you. Most modern men have atrophied their capacity to be. Their existence has been reduced to a series of automatic responses to stimuli that they do not control. If a warning sounds, they look; if someone speaks, they listen. If a question arises, they look for an immediate answer outside their own skull. They have lost the muscle of containment. When you decide to sit in emptiness, the first thing you will experience is not peace, but a physiological rebellion. Your body, accustomed to being fueled by the cheap dopamine of others, will begin to scream. You will feel itchy, anxious, an irrational urge to move or check something. That's not a sign that you need to do something productive. It's a sign that your will is so weak that your own body feels it has the right to give you orders. If you can't govern your hands so that they stay still, how do you intend to govern your destiny? The man who gives in to the discomfort of a minute of silence is a man who has already been defeated in life's greatest battles. If you can't overcome the urge to stare at a screen, you have no chance of overcoming the fear of failure or the temptation of mediocrity. Stillness is the training ground where you decide who is the master and who is the servant in your own internal hierarchy. Many people confuse being busy with being effective. Frantic activity is often the most cowardly way to avoid confrontation with oneself. The world is full of people running around, filling every second with empty words and irrelevant tasks, simply because they are terrified of what would happen if they stopped. They are afraid of discovering that, without constant movement, there is nothing solid behind their actions. Silence is the most implacable judge that exists. He doesn't accept excuses or support narratives of productivity. In a vacuum, your success is measured by your ability to sustain your presence without the need for external support. If you need to do something to feel worthy, then your worth is conditional. Depends on environment validation. Mastering your mind in the absence of distractions means dismantling that mask. It means accepting that much of what you consider your job or your personality is just an avoidance strategy. The dominant man does not flee towards action. The action emanates from his center after having been filtered by stillness. Those who cannot be still do not act. They simply react like a scared animal that runs to avoid being hit by its own thoughts. The inability to remain silent is ultimately an identity crisis. Without the constant mirror of others or other people's information, the average individual feels invisible. If you don't publish it, if you don't talk about it, if you don't consume it, it really happened. You really exist. That doubt is what pushes you to desperately seek stimulus. To master your mind, you have to be able to exist in total darkness without your sense of self wavering. You have to be enough for yourself. The void forces you to face the reality of your own substance. If you feel empty when you remove external supports, it is because you are empty. And that is the truth that most prefer to ignore through the non-stop consumption of distractions. Training in silence consists of strengthening that internal spine. It is learning to sustain the weight of your own existence without asking anyone or anything for help. Every second that you remain in the void without giving in to the temptation to escape, you are building an authority that no one can take away from you. Because those who are capable of inhabiting silence by their own choice acquire a calm that terrifies those who live enslaved by reaction. El silencio no es un espacio vacío. Es un espacio lleno de todo aquello de lo que has intentado escapar mediante la actividad frenética. When you decide to sit in stillness, the first thing that appears is not lighting, but disorder. The insecurities that you normally bury under layers of consumption arise. The regrets that you have not had the courage to process appear, and above all, the mediocrity that you try to hide with a facade of constant occupation appears. Most people avoid being alone with their minds because silence is the only judge they cannot bribe. In stillness you cannot use other people's success as a distraction, nor can you blame circumstances for your lack of direction. You are faced with your decisions. If when you close the door and turn off the stimuli you feel an urge to escape, what you feel is fear of your own reality. Mastering the mind in this state means learning to observe that discomfort without blinking. Don't try to rationalize what you feel, just watch how your mind desperately tries to find an emergency exit. That impulse to flee is your greatest weakness. It is the cable that allows the outside world to manipulate you. If you can't stare at your own unfiltered thoughts, anyone with a loud enough voice or a bright enough promise can take you wherever they want. Silence forces you to audit your motives. Why do you do what you do? It is because of your own conviction or because you are terrified of not being enough if you stop. The man who dominates the void has already heard the worst about himself and has decided not to let it affect him. He has integrated his shadows and his weaknesses, so they can no longer be used against him. Once you break through the layer of discomfort and the personal lies that silence reveals, you enter the phase of absolute clarity. This is where silence stops being a punishment and becomes your greatest competitive advantage. While the rest of the world is reacting to external impulses, you are operating from an internal database that is solid and immovable. The clarity to think without interference is what separates the pawns from the kings. In the absence of distractions, your decisions stop being emotional and become strategic. Most of the mistakes you make in life happen because you react before you process. Silence gives you the necessary space to observe reality as it is, not as your fears or desires want it to be. It is the ability to see the entire board while others only see the piece in front of them. This emotional control is not achieved by reading about Stoicism. It is achieved by inhabiting the void until the internal storm calms due to lack of fuel. Ability to observe without reacting, that is the maximum degree of mastery. When nothing external is bombarding you, you can see an impulse arise. Analyze it and let it die if it does not serve your purpose. You train your brain not to be a slave to immediacy. This is true freedom. It's not about being able to do what you want, but about not having to do what your impulses dictate. He who dominates silence becomes a rock on which the waves of chaos break without moving it even a millimeter. Real training does not occur when everything is in your favor, but when the environment offers you nothing. Most people are unable to hold a single thought for more than 30 seconds without their mind jumping to a distraction, an irrelevant memory, or a fictitious worry. This fragmentation of consciousness is the disease of our age. If you can't hold an idea in a vacuum, you don't possess that idea. That idea possesses you until something brighter catches your attention. Mastering the mind means developing the strength necessary to focus on a single point and keep it there. Against all odds, without the support of visual or auditory stimuli. It's a form of mental gymnastics that no one sees, but whose results are evident in every decision you make under pressure. When you are silent, your job is to become the observer of your own thought process. You must learn to notice the exact moment in which your attention begins to drift towards the nearest exit and with absolute coldness bring it back to the center. There are no immediate rewards, no sounds of validation, no progress visible to others. It's just your will against your own inertia. This ability not to react automatically to the internal flow of images and desires is what builds internal control. Most men are slaves to their impulses because they have never practiced the art of seeing a desire arise and letting it die from lack of attention. In silence, this exercise becomes inevitable. You feel the urge to move, you feel the urge to look outside for an answer. You feel the urge to interrupt the stillness, and on each of those occasions you have the opportunity to say no. That is not the brick with which you build your sovereignty. Every time you overcome a distracting impulse in quiet time, You are strengthening the muscle that will allow you to stay calm when the real world tries to throw you off center. It is not a question of spirituality, it is a question of engineering of the will. You are redesigning your ability to respond so that it stops being a reflex arc and becomes a conscious choice. The practical application of this mastery is not limited to the hour you spend alone. It seeps into every interaction in your daily life. A man who masters silence is a man who has learned to use pauses in a conversation as a tool of power. Not as an uncomfortable void that must be filled with empty words. The majority speaks because they are afraid of silence. You will speak because you have something to say, and when that is not the case, your presence will be enough. You will learn to reduce unnecessary consumption of other people's opinions because you will have discovered that most of them are just noise that contaminates your decision-making process. You will observe more and talk less, not out of shyness but out of efficiency. He who observes has the information, the speaker is handing it over. En el silencio de la observación detectas las debilidades ajenas. Las inconsistencias en los argumentos y las oportunidades que los demás pasan por alto porque están demasiado ocupados intentando ser el centro de atención. Your power emanates from your ability to remain unfazed while others crumble from the need to be heard. Mental mastery in emptiness teaches you that silence is not the absence of something, but absolute presence. It is the state where the mind stops being a leaf blown by the wind and becomes the mountain that the wind cannot move. He who masters his mind in total stillness, when there is nothing to distract him and no one to observe him, has achieved the highest level of self-discipline. You don't need an audience to be disciplined, you don't need an immediate goal to maintain focus. Your goal is mastery over yourself. At the end of that hour of silence, you do not leave the same person who entered. You come out with a clarity that others mistake for coldness and a determination that others mistake for arrogance. But the reality is much simpler. You have stopped being a slave to stimuli and have become the architect of your own internal reality. He who dominates his mind in silence dominates his life because there is nothing outside that can offer him something that he has not already found within himself. Most people are slaves to the clock because their mind only computes time through external events. If nothing happens outside, they feel that time stops or is lost. Mental mastery consists of learning to inhabit time subjectively, turning empty minutes into hours of strategic processing. In silence, time expands. What once seemed like an eternity, 10 minutes without stimulation, becomes a canvas where you can project and analyze every edge of your life with a precision that is impossible to achieve while the world pushes you. This expansion of time and stillness is what allows you to dismantle the error of immediacy. Today's society trains you to believe that if you don't respond in 3 seconds, you've lost. They train you for the allergic reaction, not the calculated response. When you force yourself to stay for an hour in the void, you are breaking that shackle. You are teaching your nervous system that delay in gratification and pause in action are not signs of weakness, but rather of tactical superiority. A man who can hold a vacuum for 60 minutes is a man who cannot be rushed by a crisis or manipulated by a foreign urgency. Your internal time does not belong to the market or social expectations, belongs to him. Silence also functions as a mental simulation laboratory. Without distractions, your ability to visualize sharpens until it becomes almost tangible. This is not about daydreaming or passive fantasies. It's about reverse engineering your goals. In stillness, you can mentally walk through each step of a project, anticipate every possible failure, and design the contingency before the problem even exists in the physical world. The great strategists of history did not make decisions in the midst of the heat of battle. They took them in the silence of their mind long before the first movement occurred. That's the power of a mind that doesn't need noise to function. It can see the future because it has the space to build it. You must understand that most of your thoughts are parasites that feed on your energy without giving you anything in return. They are circular worries, imaginary dialogues with people you don't care about, and projections of fears that will never happen. In silence, these parasites die from starvation. By not giving them the fuel of distraction or external validation, they are forced to reveal themselves for what they are. White noise. By eliminating that noise, what remains is the essence of your will. It is a state of productive coldness where emotion no longer clouds judgment. If you can achieve this state on a daily basis, your ability to execute orders, your own orders, becomes unstoppable. There is no longer any friction between what you decide and what you do because you have cleared the command mechanism of all the garbage the world has thrown at it. This cleansing process requires brutal honesty. In the void, you will realize that many of your ambitions are not yours, but that you have adopted them to fit in or to prove something to someone you don't even like. Silence tears away those labels. It leaves you with the harsh reality of your true impulses. Mastering your mind means having the strength to accept that reality, and if you don't like what you see, having the discipline to rebuild yourself from scratch in that same stillness. Don't wait for circumstances to change to improve. Change your internal architecture in a vacuum, and circumstances will have no choice but to align with your new power structure. Once you have secured the perimeter of your mind in solitude, the next step is to project that authority outward. Silence stops being an exercise in introspection and becomes a tool of strategic pressure on others. Most people are addicted to filling in the gaps in a conversation because the void gives them unbearable anxiety. They interpret silence as a failure in social connection when in reality it is the point of maximum pressure. When you master the void, you learn to use the power pause. In a negotiation, in a discussion, or in a direct instruction, the one who speaks first after a prolonged silence is usually the one who surrenders his position of strength. By remaining imperturbable, you force the other to reveal their cards, their insecurities, and their urgencies. Their own mind, desperate for the stimulation that you are not giving them, will begin to fabricate words to fill the gap, and in the process they will make mistakes. You are not waiting, you are observing how its internal structure crumbles in the absence of reaction on your part. This is the technical application of the control that you have cultivated alone. If you can spend an hour without distractions in your room, you can spend 30 seconds looking someone in the eyes without saying anything while they squirm in their own discomfort. That's the difference between being an actor in someone else's script and being the director of the scene. Your presence becomes heavy, dense, because it is not diluted by the need to please or be understood. Silence communicates that you don't need anything from the person in front of you, and there is nothing more intimidating to another's ego than someone who is self-sufficient. As you reduce your consumption of unnecessary opinions and data, you will notice that your language becomes more precise. You stop using fillers, you stop giving explanations that no one has asked for, and you stop justifying your decisions. A man who dominates his mind knows that every word he utters is an expenditure of energy and a delivery of information. Therefore, he economizes. Talking less is not being antisocial, it is being efficient. You observe the weaknesses in the speech of others, detect the lies they try to camouflage with verbiage, and maintain your center while others exhaust themselves trying to maintain a facade. Vacuum training gives you the ability to filter reality in real time. When someone tries to provoke you or when something unexpected arises, your mind does not immediately jump to defense. Thanks to the hours of practice in silence, you have created a space between the event and your response. That space is where your freedom lies. While the rest of the world is a series of dominoes falling one after another, you are the piece that decides not to fall. You observe the impulse of anger or fear. Analyze it with the same coldness with which you observed your thoughts in the room. And decide if that emotion serves you or if it is simply residual noise that should be ignored. This level of mastery allows you to move through the world with predatory calm. It is not a passive peace. It is the stillness of the hunter who does not expend an ounce of energy until the target is within range. People will notice the change in your energy. They won't know how to explain what it is. But they will feel that they can't manipulate you, that they can't speed you up, and that your silences say much more than their screams. You have stopped competing for attention because you have discovered that true authority does not need to be announced. It is felt in the gravity of your presence and the firmness of your gaze. Most men live in a simulation where every action is designed to be seen, judged, and validated by a third party. Their ambitions are not objectives, they are cries for help, for someone to tell them that they are on the right path. Absolute silence is the only place where that structure of dependency is starving. When you are alone, without cameras, without networks and without witnesses, there is no one to impress. That's where you discover if your goals are yours or if they are simply a disguise for your insecurity. Mastering your mind in the void gives you an independence of outcome that is terrifying to others. If you can sit for an hour and not feel the urge to share what you think, you have broken the chain of external validation. You have learned that your value is not a price in the market of other people's opinions. It is a constant that you yourself define in stillness. This sovereignty allows you to move around the world with absolute freedom. If someone criticizes you, it's noise. If someone praises you, it is noise. You have already done the audit of your own mind in silence, and you know exactly what you are worth and where you are going. The words of others no longer have the power to alter your internal architecture. This firmness translates into an unbreakable will in the face of adversity. Most break under pressure because their mind is an assembly of external voices. What their father said, what their boss expects, what society dictates. In silence you dissolve that assembly. You are left with only one voice, yours. And when that voice is the only one you hear during hours of mental training, it becomes so loud that it silences any doubt the world tries to plant in you. Mastering the absence of distractions is essentially building a mental bunker. No matter how strong the storm is outside, within your center there is an operational calm that nothing can disturb. The true application of this power is the economy of emotional energy. By not reacting to what you cannot control, you preserve all your potential for the execution of your own plans. Observe the people around you, they exhaust themselves in useless arguments. They get stressed by news that does not affect them, and they lose sleep over the perception that others have of them. They are constant energy leaks. Un hombre que ha dominado el silencio ha celado esas fugas. It is a closed, efficient, and lethal system. He doesn't spend an ounce of attention on anything that isn't aligned with his vision. That is the advantage that few understand. While others are scattered in 1,000 directions, you are a laser beam focused on a single point, fueled by the strength you have cultivated in the darkness. The annihilation of the ego in the void. The ego is a social construct, a disguise that only makes sense when someone is watching. Off stage, without the applause or criticism of others, that costume begins to weigh. In absolute silence, the ego starves because it has nothing to feed on. There are no achievements to boast, no status to defend, no comparisons to make. You are left only with the raw material of your existence, and for many that material is insufficient. The death of the ego in solitude is not a poetic concept, it is a cleansing operation. When you sit for an hour without distractions, the ego will try to survive by inventing heroic narratives or projecting future tragedies. He will try to convince you that you are special or that you are a victim. Anything to avoid accepting that at that moment you are nothing more than a consciousness observing the void. If you can defeat that need to be someone while you are alone, you will have unlocked the highest level of personal power. You will no longer be a slave to your own reputation. A man who has killed his ego in stillness is a man who cannot be manipulated by flattery or insult. If you no longer need the world to confirm who you are, the world loses its chains on you. Most of the stupid decisions people make, buying things they don't need, getting into fights they can't win, seeking jobs they don't want, are born from an ego desperate for attention. In silence, that ego dissolves and what emerges is pure will. A will that does not seek to shine, but to execute. A will that does not need witnesses to be disciplined. This ego death gives you surgical clarity. Not being clouded by the need to protect your image, you can view your mistakes with absolute coldness. You can admit where you are weak and where you have failed without it destroying your sense of self. Silence allows you to dissect yourself as if you were a stranger, eliminating what is useless and strengthening what is real. The man who fears silence fears the truth. The man who dominates silence uses the truth as a weapon to continually rebuild himself. At the end of this process, the ego is no longer the one driving the vehicle. It is simply a tool that you use when you go out into the outside world. You know it is a mask and therefore you can change it, adjust it, or take it off as it suits you. You are not attached to her. Your center of gravity has shifted from the periphery, what others see, to the core, what you are in the dark. This is true mental sovereignty. You are the owner of your own silence, and by extension you are the owner of every action that emanates from it. What the masses call boredom is actually the symptom of a mind that has lost the ability to generate its own value and is dependent on a force feed of external stimuli. The average man flees from boredom as if it were a disease when it is the necessary threshold to access higher levels of thought. If you cannot tolerate the absence of novelty, you will never be able to build anything that lasts. Because any project of magnitude requires long periods of monotonous and silent execution where there is no applause or immediate dopamine. Mastering your mind in the void means learning to turn boredom into a state of alertness. While others are desperate for a distraction, you use that time to refine your focus. Boredom is the test that separates dilettantes from professionals. The dilettante needs the path to be entertaining, the professional only needs the path to take him to his goal. In silence you train the ability to maintain cognitive effort without external reward. This is the basis of blind discipline. If you can sit for an hour staring at a wall without losing your mind, you can spend 10 hours working on a complex strategy without getting distracted. You have killed the need for the world to entertain you so that you can function. This resistance to vacuum translates into a brutal competitive advantage. Most of your competitors will drop out when things get monotonous or when recognition takes a long time to come. Their quick response mind will tell them to change course, to look for something new or more exciting. You, on the other hand, will have conditioned your nervous system to find stability in stillness. You don't get bored because your mind is not empty, it is processing, analyzing and strengthening the vision you have built in your hours of isolation. Silence grants you the patience of the predator. He who cannot stand boredom will always be easy prey for those who know how to wait for the right moment. As you delve deeper into this practice, you will notice that your strategic intuition becomes sharper. By clearing the noise of other people's opinions and fictitious urgencies, you begin to see patterns that were previously invisible. Intuition is not magic. It is the result of a mind that has enough space to connect dots that others ignore because they are too busy reacting. In silence, your subconscious works without interference, giving you precise solutions to problems that seemed insoluble in the midst of chaos. Mental mastery in the absence of distractions is the act of clearing the central processor so that it can operate at its maximum capacity. You are not doing anything, you are allowing your intelligence to work without the shackles of cheap stimulus. The anatomy of the dominant gaze is not a body language trick. It is the physical manifestation of a mind that has stopped seeking permission. Most men have an erratic look because their thoughts are erratic. Their eyes jump from one stimulus to another looking for a sign of security, a response on the interlocutor's face, or a distraction that relieves them from the pressure of the moment. Training in absolute silence eliminates the need to escape. When you've spent an hour staring into space without mentally blinking, looking another human being in the eye becomes a natural task. Your gaze takes on a density that others interpret as authority, but which in reality is simply the absence of internal turmoil. In silence you learn that eye contact is not a competition, but a declaration of presence. A man who masters his mind does not need to win a staring duel, he simply has no internal reason to divert it. His gaze is fixed because his purpose is fixed. When you talk to someone, the silence you have cultivated in solitude is projected through your eyes. You're not looking for their approval, you're not trying to guess what they think of you. And you're not afraid of what they might see inside you. Having audited your own shadows in stillness, there is nothing to hide. That transparency is what is intimidating. People fear what they cannot disturb, and a gaze that is born from silence is by definition imperturbable. This projection of presence is based on the economy of eye movement. He watches people uncertainly, his eyes constantly moving, scanning the environment for threats or validation. A man who masters emptiness has trained his ability to focus. Their eyes move only when there is a clear reason to do so. This visual stillness communicates that you are the center of gravity in the room. It is not you who adjusts to the environment, it is the environment that must adjust to your presence. Internal silence gives you control over the pace of the interaction. You can hold your gaze during a prolonged silence in a conversation, forcing the other person to process the pressure that you have already learned to handle in solitude. The domain of the dominant gaze is also the domain of cold observation. In the void you learn to observe your thoughts without judging or reacting to them. Now you apply that same ability to others. You look at people not as judges of your worth, but as sources of information. You detect their tics, their micro-expressions of insecurity, and the lack of coherence between their words and their body language. You do all this from a position of absolute neutrality. Your gaze does not judge, it simply processes. That lack of emotional reaction is what gives you the advantage. While the other person is trying to figure out what you are thinking, you have already finished mapping their mental structure.
Silence has given you the time and distance necessary to be the sovereign observer in a world of actors desperate for attention.
A man who has spent an hour in absolute silence does not leave his room wanting to waste words. He comes out with a much higher measuring stick for what deserves to be said. Verbiage is the refuge of insecurity. It is the desperate attempt to convince others and oneself that one is in control.
But control is not announced, it is exercised.
The silence you have cultivated gives you the ability to reduce your thoughts to their purest and most direct essence. Your words stop being suggestions and become guidelines. When you master the void, you understand that each syllable is a delivery of energy. If you talk too much, you are diluting your authority. Concise language communicates that your time and attention are rare and valuable resources. You don't give unnecessary explanations because you're not looking for validation. If someone does not understand a direct order, the problem is their ability to understand, not your lack of detail. In silence you learn that the truth does not need embellishments to be solid. Applying this to your daily communication separates you from the masses who constantly need to sell themselves. You don't sell yourself, you expose a reality and let others position themselves in front of it. This economy of language creates an information vacuum that others will try to fill with their own insecurities. By talking less, you force others to talk more. And in that flow of other people's words, you get the complete map of their weaknesses. While they exhaust themselves trying to be charismatic or persuasive, you maintain your center. The silence between your sentences is not an absence of content, it is a demonstration of presence. It is the space where your words land and gain weight. A man who can sustain silence after saying something important is a man who fully trusts in the power of his message. You don't need to fill the gap with nervous laughter or clarifications, let the impact do its work. This mastery extends to the elimination of verbal reactivity. In everyday noise, people respond to insults, criticism, or challenges almost instantly, motivated by ego. You, trained in stillness, have broken that reflection. If someone tries to provoke you, your response is silence or a short, firm phrase that disarms their strategy. You don't play their game because your mind doesn't need to defend itself from external attacks. Your identity has already been reinforced in solitude. Concise language is your shield and your tool. It allows you to cut through unnecessary drama and keep focus on your strategic goals. At the end of the day, the one who speaks the most is the one who exposes himself the most. The one who dominates the silence is the one who maintains control. In immunity to external chaos, the real test of all this training is revealed. The structure you have built in isolation faces the entropy of the real world. Most men are thermometers, their internal state rises or falls depending on the temperature of their environment. If there is a crisis, they panic. If there is conflict, they get upset. If there is uncertainty, they paralyze. A man who has mastered his mind in a vacuum ceases to be a thermometer and becomes a regulator. It does not reflect the environment, it stabilizes it with its presence. Your inner stillness is so solid that outer chaos impacts without disordering your command center. This immunity is not a lack of empathy or a disconnection from reality. It is a hyperconnection with the hierarchy of priorities. In the silence of your room, you learn to distinguish between what is an irrelevant impulse and what is a strategic necessity. When you go out into the world, you apply that same filter. When everything around you collapses, your mind processes the data with the coldness of someone observing a landscape from a shielded window. While others waste time complaining or looking for blame, you are already calculating your next move.
The void has taught you that panic is a useless waste of mental bandwidth.
If there is no immediate action that can change the outcome, any internal turmoil is simply self-inflicted noise.
Mental mastery in the absence of distractions gives you the ability to sustain uncertainty.
The masses need quick answers to calm their anxiety. You, on the other hand, have learned to inhabit the question. You can remain in the center of a conflict without the urge to resolve it through an emotional reaction. This strategic patience throws others off.
They expect you to break down, scream, or run away.
But all they find is absolute silence and a look that has already foreseen the end of the game. By not giving them a reaction to hold on to, you leave them suspended in their own tension. Your immunity to chaos is one of your greatest advantages.
Finally, this mental structure allows you to operate when there is no clarity.
When there are no guides, when the rules change, and when no one knows what to do. You move with the confidence of someone who has already been in the void and has emerged stable. Silence has taken away your fear of not knowing. Because you have discovered that in absolute stillness the answer can arise from your own will and judgment. He who dominates his mind in silence is capable of maintaining direction in the midst of uncertainty. Because his reference is internal and does not depend on external noise. The process by which you transform emptiness into a clear decision is direct. Most make decisions from an altered state, fear of losing an opportunity, desire for revenge, or need to relieve immediate tension. They are decisions that are born from noise. When you have trained silence, you know that the only solid decision is the one that resists the absence of emotion.
In stillness you eliminate excess drama and are left with the logic of cause and effect.
This coldness is not a lack of passion, it is precision. By training your mind not to react to internal impulses during loneliness, you have created a filter. When an external situation demands a response, the impulse appears but does not drag you. In that brief space that you control, you evaluate the play. You're not wondering how this makes me feel, you're asking what move maximizes my position.
Silence has given you strategic pause.
While others react hastily, you choose with stability. Mastering the mind in emptiness also allows you to accept the cost.
Every decision implies renunciation, risk, or sacrifice. Most are paralyzed because their mind is full of noise that promises to avoid the price.
In silence, that illusion dissolves.
You understand that moving forward requires leaving something behind.
The firm decision is the one that cuts off what does not serve to preserve what is essential. If you have been able to eliminate your own distractions into stillness, you will be able to make difficult decisions in your life without getting stuck in doubt.
Finally, this architecture is sealed with absolute commitment to the course of action.
Once the decision has been filtered by silence, it ceases to be an option and becomes an internal law. There is no room for later doubt because doubt is just noise trying to re-enter the system. The man who masters his mind does not spend energy regretting or reconsidering each step.
He trusts the audit process he carried out in a vacuum. That confidence is what others perceive as an unusual determination.
It's not that you're smarter or braver, it's that your decision-making process is cleaner. It is a straight line that goes from intention to execution, passing through the filter of silence. The critical bridge between the vacuum chamber and the field of action is the transition. The majority break the silence violently, end their hour of quiet, and immediately immerse themselves in consumption. Checking messages, turning on the screen, or searching for conversation. With that, you cancel the work you just built. It's like cleaning a system and filling it with noise again. The return must be a conscious transition, not a surrender to the stimulus.
When the time is up, don't move right away. Stay a few more minutes with your eyes open, integrating the environment into your command state. Observe the room, the objects, and your own body from the observer's position. Feel the stability of your presence. Don't go out into the world to look for what has happened. Go out to decide what is going to happen now that you are in control. Silence doesn't stay in the room, it stays in your core. It is the engine that drives each of your movements.
As you resume your activities, apply the rule of the minimum necessary response. Don't feel the urge to catch up with the noise. If someone speaks to you, respond clearly and economically. If a problem arises, treat it with the same coldness with which you observed your thoughts. The goal is not to isolate yourself, it is to operate with precision. Silence is your base, and any external interaction is an interruption that you manage. Mantenun a parte tu attention anclata en ese vacío interno incluso en medio del caos. That is your reserve of control. We come to the end of this episode. Silence is not the absence of something, it is the total presence of yourself. It is the only place where you cannot hide. But it is also the only place where you can build a will that does not depend on anything or anyone. He who fears silence lives conditioned by circumstances, he who dominates it builds his direction from within. Don't look for motivation in these words, look for recognition. If you have come this far, it is because you know that the structure of your mind is the most important asset you have. Everything else is a consequence of what you have cultivated in stillness. The episode ends here, but the training continues. The next time you find yourself in a situation without distractions, don't look for a way out. Stay there. Observe until your mind stabilizes and your attention stops wandering. At that point you will understand that the control is yours. He who dominates his mind in silence directs his life with clarity. Get out there and let your presence reflect that control without needing to explain it. This is what happens when you take your silence to the outside world and use it as a tool of precision. Most people are desperate to be validated, to be heard, to feel like they fit in. That desperation is their greatest vulnerability. When you appear with a mind trained in emptiness, your lack of need changes the balance. You don't have to attack, you just have to not react. Imagine a negotiation table, a business dinner, or a personal confrontation. The air is filled with words, justifications, noise. In this scenario, whoever dominates the silence holds the axis of the interaction. By not offering an immediate response, you force the other person to project their doubts onto your pause. They start to wonder what you're thinking. If you're seeing something they don't see, why don't you get upset? That doubt defines a large part of the game before you speak. Silence is not passive, it is a space where information appears. The more you stay silent, the more they expose themselves. The less you move, the more its need to fill the void accelerates. This technique requires that you have previously trained your own stability in solitude. If you haven't done so, your body will betray you, your eyes will move uncontrollably. Your hands will look for distractions, or you will break the tension with unnecessary gestures. But if you have trained, tension stops being a problem and becomes a tool. You can hold it without discomfort. You watch how others try to fill in the space, how they reveal more than they should. Your silence becomes a mirror where your internal state is reflected. Don't leave the silent hour expecting the world to change, leave knowing that you operate with more clarity. So that this mental architecture does not become diluted, maintain simple and firm principles in your behavior.
Understand that impulsive action almost always weakens your position. If you don't have a move that will clearly improve your situation, the best decision may be not to act immediately. While others rush, you conserve energy and choose the right moment. Silence teaches you that pause is also a form of action. Eliminate the immediate response from your behavior. Give yourself a few seconds before speaking or deciding. That little space is where you regain control. Communicate that you do not react on impulse, but rather choose with intention. Whoever responds instantly is usually reacting. Whoever takes their time is evaluating. The noise from the environment tries to drag you into constant reaction. Your reference is not what happens outside, it is the stability that you have built inside. If the environment speeds up, you keep the pace. If there is pressure, you maintain clarity. You have learned that the environment only has an influence if you give it your attention. Stay focused on what matters. Your calm is an operational advantage and your attention is a resource that you decide where to place.